The letter arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, folded too neatly for bad news, my name written in my husband's handwriting that I hadn't seen in months. By then, the house felt too big without him, every room holding an echo of things we never finished saying. I remember standing by the front door, mail in one hand, coffee going cold in the other, thinking it was strange how life keeps moving even after it breaks you. I didn't know that opening that envelope would change the direction of my life in ways I couldn't imagine. My husband, Daniel, had always been a man of few words but deep thoughts. We were married for 15 years, most of them good, some painfully quiet. Toward the end, he talked even less about his past, especially about Texas. Whenever the word farm came up, he'd brush it off with a tired smile and say, "That place doesn't matter anymore." I believed him. I had no reason not to. So when the letter said he had willed me his broken-down farm in Texas, the one nobody wanted, I actually laughed out loud. It felt like a joke he left behind, one last strange gift. At first, I didn't even want to go. Friends told me to sell it, sign whatever papers I needed, and move on. They said Texas was far. The land was probably worthless, and it would only reopen wounds. But something about the way Daniel had written the letter made me pause. He didn't explain much. He just said the farm was mine now, and that I should see it with my own eyes before deciding anything. He ended the letter with, "There are things there I never knew how to tell you." That sentence stayed with me, repeating in my head late at night when sleep wouldn't come. So a month later, with a suitcase that felt too small for my nerves, I found myself driving down a long, cracked road under the wide Texas sky. The air felt heavier there, like it carried stories in the dust. When the farm finally came into view, my heart sank. The house leaned slightly to one side, the paint peeled like old scabs, and the barn looked ready to collapse with the next strong wind. Dry weeds swallowed the fence, and the land felt forgotten, like it had been holding its breath for years. I understood immediately why nobody wanted it. Standing there alone, I felt foolish for coming. Grief does strange things to people, and I wondered if this was just another mistake made from missing someone too much. But then I remembered Daniel's words. There are things there I never knew how to tell you. That thought pushed me forward. I unlocked the front door, half expecting it to fall off its hinges, and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Old wood, dust, and something faintly familiar, like the pages of an old book. Sunlight slipped through cracked windows, lighting up furniture covered in sheets. It felt less like an abandoned house and more like a place frozen in time. I walked slowly, each step creaking under my feet, my chest tight with a mix of sadness and curiosity. This was a part of my husband's life I had never seen, a chapter he kept locked away. As I explored the rooms, small details began to stand out. A coat hanging behind a door, neatly placed as if someone planned to come back for it. A table set for two, plates dusty, but aligned with care. It didn't feel random or neglected. It felt intentional, like someone had left in a hurry, but with purpose. That's when the unease started to creep in. Why would Daniel keep this place preserved like this, yet never bring me here? In the bedroom, I found a wooden trunk at the foot of the bed. It was heavy, scratched, and locked. My first instinct was to leave it alone. I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever memories it held. But my hands moved on their own, fingers tracing the worn edges. The lock was old, and with a little effort, it gave way. Inside were stacks of letters, journals, and photographs. Some showed Daniel as a younger man, smiling in ways I had never seen. Others showed people I didn't recognize, standing in front of this same farmhouse, looking both proud and afraid. I sat on the floor, surrounded by dust and silence, and started reading. The journals weren't neat or polished. They were raw, filled with crossed-out lines and ink stains, like he had poured his thoughts onto the page, without stopping to clean them up. He wrote about the farm, about family, about mistakes that haunted him. Page after page revealed a side of my husband that felt both familiar and completely new. My chest tightened as I realized how much he had carried alone. As the sun began to set, shadows stretched across the room, and the house seemed to breathe with me. I kept reading, unable to stop, my emotions swinging between anger, heartbreak, and understanding. Then I came across an entry that made my hands shake. It mentioned something hidden on the land, something he was afraid to retrieve himself. He didn't explain what it was, only that it was the reason he believed nobody wanted the farm anymore. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside felt louder, every thought heavier. The wind rattled the windows, and I wondered how many secrets this land had swallowed over the years. I thought about leaving the next morning, pretending I never came. But another part of me, stronger and more stubborn, knew I couldn't walk away now. Not when I was this close to understanding the man I loved. The next day, armed with nothing but the journal and a growing sense of dread, I stepped outside and looked across the fields. The land stretched out endlessly, quiet and watchful. Somewhere out there was whatever Daniel had been running from, whatever he couldn't bring himself to face. My heart pounded as I took my first step toward the old barn at the edge of the property, the journal clutched tightly in my hand. I had no idea that what I was about to find would challenge everything I thought I knew about my husband, our marriage, and the quiet life we shared. And as I reached for the barn door, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on me, I realized this broken-down farm wasn't unwanted at all. It was waiting, and whatever was waiting inside was about to change my life forever. The barn door groaned as I pulled it open, the sound echoing across the quiet land like a warning. Dust floated in the air, catching the light in slow, drifting patterns. Inside, the barn was larger than it looked from the outside, its wooden beams darkened by age and time. Tools hung neatly along one wall, far too organized for a place supposedly abandoned. I stood there, frozen for a moment, listening to my own breathing, wondering how many times my husband had stood in this same spot, carrying secrets he never shared with me. I didn't go far at first. I stayed near the entrance, scanning every corner as if the past might suddenly step out and speak. There were old farming machines, rusted but cared for, and stacks of hay that looked like they had been moved not too long ago. That made my stomach tighten. If nobody wanted this farm, if it was truly forgotten, then who had been here? Or had Daniel been coming back alone, quietly, without telling anyone? As I explored more, I began to see signs of his presence everywhere. His handwriting labeled jars on a shelf. His old jacket hung from a nail, the same one he used to wear on cold mornings back home. I pressed my face into the fabric without thinking, breathing in the faint scent that reminded me of him. It felt like he was close, just out of reach, watching to see what I would do next. The journals mentioned the farm as both a refuge and a burden. Daniel wrote about growing up here, about long days under the Texas sun and longer nights filled with worry. He loved the land, but it also held memories he couldn't escape. He wrote about family arguments, about promises broken, and about something that changed everything one summer. He never named it directly, only calling it the mistake. Every time he came close to explaining it, his words became shaky, the sentences unfinished. As I read more, I began to understand why he never wanted to talk about this place. The farm wasn't just land and buildings. It was the center of his identity, the place that shaped him before I ever knew him. And somewhere along the way, it became the place he lost something he could never get back. That loss followed him into our marriage, into the quiet moments when he would stare off into nothing, lost in thoughts he never voiced. That afternoon, I drove into the nearest town, hoping to learn more. It was small, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and strangers stand out without trying. The moment I mentioned the farm, conversations shifted. Smiles tightened. Eyes looked away. An older woman at the diner paused mid-sentence when I said Daniel's name, her hand trembling slightly as she poured coffee. She asked me who I was, and when I told her I was his wife, her expression softened with something like pity. Some places hold on to their stories, she said quietly, even when people leave. I asked her what she meant, but she only shook her head and walked away. Others were no more helpful. Some claimed they didn't remember much. Others said the farm had always been trouble and that it was better left alone. One man muttered that Daniel was lucky to have escaped when he did. None of them explained what had actually happened, and that silence spoke louder than any answer. Driving back, I felt a growing sense of isolation. It was as if the town itself was protecting a secret, and I wasn't sure if it was out of loyalty, fear, or guilt. The sun dipped low, painting the fields in gold and shadow, and I wondered how Daniel survived carrying all of this alone. I thought about our life together, about the moments when I felt him pull away emotionally, and how I assumed it was just stress or exhaustion. Now I knew it was something deeper. That night, I went through more of the journals. One entry described the barn in detail, mentioning a loose floorboard near the back, under the old workbench. My heart started racing as I read those words. He wrote about hiding something there, something he couldn't bring himself to destroy or reveal. He said it was proof of the truth, whatever that meant. Proof of what? And why leave it for me to find? Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house made me sit up, listening. The farm felt different at night, heavier, like it was watching me. I kept thinking about the town, the way people avoided my questions, and the way Daniel's words danced around the truth without ever landing on it. Part of me wanted to stop digging, to pack up and leave before I uncovered something I couldn't handle. But another part of me felt a responsibility, not just to my husband, but to myself. The next morning, I returned to the barn. Sunlight spilled through the gaps in the wood, but the air still felt cool and still. I found the old workbench easily. It was worn smooth, marked by years of use. My hands shook as I knelt down and ran my fingers along the floor, searching for the board Daniel described. When I found it, it shifted slightly under pressure. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't lift it right away. I sat back on my heels, staring at that small gap, feeling the weight of the moment. Whatever was underneath had been hidden for years. Whatever it was, Daniel believed it explained everything. I wondered if uncovering it would bring me closer to him, or push me further away from the memory of the man I thought I knew. Before I could decide, I heard a sound outside. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath, listening as they came closer to the barn. The door creaked open again, just as it had when I arrived, but this time, I wasn't alone. A shadow stretched across the floor, long and unfamiliar. My heart leapt into my throat as I stood up, turning to face whoever had entered. The figure didn't speak right away. They just stood there, watching me, their expression unreadable in the dim light. In that moment, I realized the farm's secrets weren't as buried as I thought. Someone else knew. Someone else had been waiting. And whatever Daniel left behind wasn't meant for me alone. The man standing in the barn doorway was older than I expected, his shoulders slightly hunched, his face lined by years of sun and worry. He wore a dusty hat he didn't take off right away, as if he wasn't sure whether he was welcome. We stared at each other in silence, the air thick with questions neither of us seemed ready to ask. Finally, he cleared his throat and said my husband's name, not as a greeting, but as a test. I told him who I was, my voice steadier than I felt. His eyes softened for a brief moment, then hardened again, like a door closing. He said his name was Samuel and that he used to work on the farm years ago, back when Daniel was still around. He claimed he'd heard someone was back on the property and wanted to see for himself. The way he said it made me uneasy, like he was checking on something, not someone. I asked him why the town avoided talking about the farm. Samuel looked past me, deeper into the barn, his jaw tightening. He said some things were better left where they were, that digging up the past only brings trouble. When I told him Daniel had left me the farm and that I deserved to know the truth, he sighed heavily, as if he'd been waiting for this day, but hoping it would never come. He didn't explain much. He spoke in fragments, half-finished thoughts. He mentioned a summer when everything went wrong, when people got hurt in ways that never fully healed. He said Daniel wasn't a bad man, just a young one who made a choice that followed him for the rest of his life. When I pressed for details, Samuel shook his head and said, "If he didn't tell you himself, there was a reason." After he left, I felt more unsettled than before. His visit confirmed what I already suspected. The farm was not abandoned in spirit, only in appearance. People were still tied to it, still watching it from a distance. That made me wonder how many others knew about the hidden floorboard, about whatever Daniel had left behind. The thought made my skin prickle. Over the next few days, I stayed on the farm, trying to piece together Daniel's past through his journals and the land itself. Each entry revealed more cracks in the story he'd shared with me during our marriage. He wrote about pressure from his family, about debts and expectations that felt impossible to meet. He wrote about wanting to leave but feeling responsible for something that happened here, something he believed he needed to make right before he could truly move on. One journal entry stood out more than the others. It described a night when everything changed, when a decision made in fear set off a chain of events he couldn't stop. He wrote about voices raised in the barn, about anger and desperation mixing into something dangerous. He stopped short of explaining the outcome, only writing that the farm became marked after that night, unwanted and whispered about. I tried to imagine Daniel as a younger man, standing in that same barn, surrounded by people who expected answers he didn't have. It was hard to connect that image to the quiet, gentle man I married. The more I learned, the more complicated he became. Loving someone doesn't mean knowing everything about them, and that truth settled heavily in my chest. Meanwhile, the town continued to watch me from afar. At the grocery store, conversations paused when I walked down the aisle. A woman approached me one afternoon, introducing herself as Ruth, and warned me not to trust everyone who claimed to be helping. She said the farm brought out the worst in people, even those who seemed kind. When I asked her why, she simply said, "Because everyone wants something from it." That comment stayed with me. What could anyone want from a broken-down farm that nobody wanted? The land was dry, the buildings old. Yet Daniel believed something hidden here was important enough to protect for years. Important enough to burden him with guilt and silence. I began to wonder if the farm's value wasn't in what could be grown on it, but in what it concealed. Late one evening, I heard a truck slow down near the property. I watched from the window as headlights swept across the fields, then disappeared. It didn't stop, but the message felt clear. I wasn't alone out here. Someone was paying attention. I locked the doors that night, something I hadn't done since arriving, and slept lightly, waking at every sound. The next morning, I finally gathered the courage to return to the loose floorboard. I told myself I would just look, just confirm that something was there. As I knelt down and lifted it slightly, my heart pounding, I noticed fresh dirt around the edges. Someone had been here recently. Someone other than me. I quickly put the board back in place, my hands shaking, my thoughts racing. That discovery changed everything. It meant Daniel's secret was no longer his alone, and it might not even be safe. I felt torn between fear and determination. Part of me wanted to call a lawyer or even the authorities, but I didn't know what I was dealing with yet. Another part of me felt a deep, personal need to see this through, to understand what my husband couldn't bring himself to share. As days passed, I began to see Daniel's journals less as confessions and more as warnings. He wrote about trust, about how quickly people turn when fear or money is involved. He wrote that the farm showed him who people really were. Reading those words now, surrounded by uneasy glances and half-truths, I understood what he meant. One night, as I sat on the porch watching the sun set over the fields, I felt a mix of grief and resolve. The farm wasn't just a place Daniel left me. It was a puzzle, a test, and perhaps an apology. Whatever happened here shaped him, and now it was shaping me. I didn't know who I could trust, or how deep this mystery went, but I knew one thing for certain. The truth hidden on this Texas farm was bigger than a broken-down house and an old barn. And the closer I got to it, the more dangerous it seemed. By the end of that week, the farm felt less like an inheritance and more like a living thing, watching my every move. Every gust of wind across the field sounded like a whisper. Every creak of wood felt intentional. I kept Daniel's journal close, not just for answers, but for comfort. Reading his words made me feel less alone, even as they filled me with dread. He had known this moment would come. I could feel it in the way he wrote, careful but urgent, as if he were speaking to me across time. One entry mentioned a deadline he never explained. He wrote about running out of time, about hoping the farm would stay forgotten long enough for things to settle. That sentence made my chest tighten. Settle how? And why now, after all these years, did people suddenly seem aware that I was here? The thought that my presence had stirred something buried made it hard to breathe. The tension followed me everywhere. Even simple tasks like cleaning the house or walking the fence line felt loaded with meaning. I found myself looking over my shoulder, listening for footsteps that weren't there. The land was quiet, but not peaceful. It carried the kind of silence that comes before a storm. One afternoon, I noticed tire tracks near the barn that hadn't been there the day before.
Fresh. Clear.
They led close to the structure, then turned back toward the road. I stood there for a long time, staring at them, my heart racing. Whoever was watching me wasn't just curious anymore. They were checking on something, or making sure it was still hidden. That night, I dreamt of Daniel. He stood at the edge of the field, calling my name, but every time I moved toward him, the ground shifted beneath my feet. I woke up with tears on my face, and his last words echoing in my head. There are things there I never knew how to tell you. I understood now that he hadn't been protecting himself by staying silent.
He had been protecting me.
The next day, Samuel returned. This time, he didn't pretend he was just stopping by. He walked straight up to the porch and asked me what I'd found. His voice was tense, his eyes searching my face for clues. I told him I was still trying to understand Daniel's past. He nodded slowly, then warned me that others might not be as patient as he was. People have waited a long time, he said. They think what's here belongs to them. I asked him who they were, but he didn't answer. Instead, he told me to be careful, to lock my doors, and to stop asking questions in town. Before leaving, he added something that sent a chill through me. Daniel knew this would happen. That's why he left it to you. After he left, I sat alone for a long time, staring out at the fields. The idea that my husband had planned this, that he had knowingly passed this burden to me, hurt more than I expected. But mixed with that hurt was a strange sense of trust. He believed I could handle it. Or maybe he believed I was the only one who should. As the days grew hotter, so did the tension. Ruth stopped me outside the post office and asked if I'd found what I was looking for. When I said no, her relief was obvious. She told me some people in town were nervous, that old arguments were resurfacing. She said the farm had a way of dragging the past into the present, whether anyone wanted it or not. Back at the house, I read the final pages of one journal. Daniel wrote about guilt, about carrying the weight of a choice that changed several lives. He wrote that hiding the truth hadn't erased it, only delayed the damage. His last entry ended abruptly, as if he couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. The page was smudged, the ink uneven. I traced the words with my finger, feeling the emotion behind them. That evening, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked across the sky, and rain pounded the roof, loud and relentless. The power went out, plunging the house into darkness. I lit candles and sat at the kitchen table, the journal open in front of me, my mind racing. The storm felt symbolic, like the land itself reacting to what was coming. Then I heard it, a knock at the door. My heart nearly stopped. No one should have been out in weather like this. I didn't move right away, listening for another sound. The knock came again, firmer this time. I approached the door slowly, every instinct telling me to turn back. When I asked who it was, a voice answered, calm but unfamiliar. They said they just wanted to talk. I didn't open the door.
Not yet.
Through the window, I saw the outline of a person standing in the rain, their face hidden by shadow. They said they knew Daniel, that they knew why he left, that they knew what was hidden on the farm. My hands shook as I backed away, my thoughts racing. How many people knew? How long had this secret been passed around in whispers and half-truths? The voice outside continued, telling me I didn't understand what I was sitting on, that the farm was never really abandoned. It was waiting for the right moment. Eventually, the knocking stopped. The figure disappeared into the rain, leaving me alone with the sound of thunder and my own pounding heart.
I didn't sleep that night.
I sat by the window, watching the storm fade, knowing the calm wouldn't last. The next morning, I found something on the porch. A small object placed carefully near the door. It was old, worn, and unmistakably connected to the journals I'd been reading. Proof that whoever was watching me wasn't bluffing. They were getting closer. I stood there, holding that object in my hand, feeling the weight of the past and the danger of the present collide. The loose floorboard in the barn waited. The truth waited. And I knew that once I uncovered it, there would be no turning back. I turned the object over in my hands, my pulse racing. It was a small metal key, worn smooth with age, the kind that didn't belong to any modern lock. Attached to it was a faded tag with a number scratched into the surface, barely visible unless the light hit it just right. I recognized that number immediately. It matched a page reference from Daniel's journal, one I hadn't fully understood before. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. That realization made everything feel more dangerous. Whoever left the key wasn't trying to scare me away. They wanted me to move forward, but on their terms. That scared me more than any threat could have. I locked the door, closed the curtains, and sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the key as if it might explain itself. When I finally opened the journal again, my hands were shaking. I flipped to the marked page and read it slowly. Daniel wrote about a second hiding place, not in the barn, but somewhere no one would think to look anymore. He mentioned a box, old records, and a truth that could shift blame in ways people weren't ready for. He also wrote that if I ever found the key, it meant the past had caught up to us both. Us both. That phrase echoed in my mind. Until now, I thought whatever happened on this Texas farm belonged solely to Daniel's past. But that sentence suggested something bigger, something that tied other lives into this story more tightly than I realized. It wasn't just about guilt. It was about responsibility, and maybe even betrayal. I drove into town that afternoon, the key hidden in my pocket, my nerves stretched thin. I needed answers, even if people didn't want to give them. At the courthouse, I requested old property records related to the farm. The clerk hesitated when she saw the address, her fingers pausing on the keyboard. She asked why I wanted them. When I said I was the owner now, her eyes widened slightly. "That's complicated," she said. The records showed something I didn't expect. Over the years, the farm had changed hands on paper more than once, but the transfers were strange. Incomplete. Some signatures missing. One name appeared repeatedly alongside Daniel's family name, a name I didn't recognize but had seen mentioned briefly in the journals. It suggested shared ownership, or at least shared involvement, long after Daniel claimed to have walked away. I left the courthouse with more questions than answers. On my way out, I noticed a man watching me from across the street. He didn't hide it. He just leaned against his truck, arms crossed, eyes fixed on me. When our eyes met, he nodded slightly, as if acknowledging something unspoken. I didn't recognize him, but the feeling that he recognized me was unmistakable. Back at the farm, the sense of being watched grew heavier. I avoided the barn for the rest of the day, unable to shake the thought that someone else might be waiting there. Instead, I searched the house more carefully, checking drawers and cabinets I'd ignored before. That's when I found a loose panel behind a bookshelf in the living room. Behind it was a narrow space holding a small wooden box. My breath caught as I unlocked it with a key from the porch. Inside were documents, old photographs, and a cassette tape labeled with Daniel's handwriting. The photos showed a group of people standing near the barn, their faces serious, almost tense. Daniel was among them, younger and visibly stressed. Next to him stood the same man I'd seen outside the courthouse. My hands trembled as I held the tape. Daniel had never mentioned recording anything. Why hide it here, instead of with the journals? The answer felt obvious and unsettling. This was something even more dangerous. Something meant to be found only when the timing was right. Before I could think too much about it, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I froze, listening as a door slammed shut. Footsteps approached the house, heavier and more urgent than before. A knock followed, sharp and insistent. I didn't answer. Instead, I moved quietly toward the back of the house, clutching the box to my chest. A voice called out my name. It wasn't Samuel's. It wasn't the stranger from the storm either. This voice sounded familiar in a way I couldn't place, like I'd heard it through a wall or over a phone call long ago. He said he just wanted to talk, that things had gone far enough, and that Daniel never meant for this to spiral the way it had. That sentence sent a chill through me. Whatever secret this farm held, it wasn't static. It was active. It was still affecting people, still driving fear and urgency years later. I realized then that Daniel's death hadn't ended anything. It had simply removed the one person holding everything in balance. I stayed silent until the footsteps retreated, the car driving away slowly, deliberately. When the sound faded, I sank to the floor, my heart pounding. The tape sat heavy in my hands. I wanted to play it, to hear Daniel's voice again, to finally understand what he'd been protecting. But a deeper instinct told me to wait. Once I listened, there would be no pretending anymore. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying everything in my mind, the records, the photographs, the men who seemed to appear whenever I got close to the truth. This wasn't just about a broken-down farm in Texas anymore. It was about shared secrets, divided loyalties, and a past that refused to stay buried. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I couldn't face this alone. But I also couldn't trust just anyone. Daniel had chosen me for a reason, and now I understood why. Whatever he left behind was powerful enough to make people nervous, angry, and desperate. I stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the fields, knowing the next step would push everything closer to the edge. The farm wasn't unwanted. It was contested, and the truth hidden within it was about to force itself into the open, whether anyone was ready or not. By mid-morning, the weight of waiting became unbearable. I carried the wooden box out to the barn, the journals tucked under my arm, the cassette tape resting on top like it had a pulse of its own. The air felt thick, charged, as if the land knew what I was about to do. I didn't bother checking over my shoulder anymore. If someone was watching, they were going to see this through to the end, just like I was. I lifted the loose floorboard fully this time. Beneath it was a shallow space lined with old cloth. Inside sat a rusted metal case, heavier than I expected. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were more documents, official ones, along with a smaller recorder that matched the tape. It hit me then that Daniel hadn't hidden one truth. He had built layers around it like armor. I sat on the barn floor and finally played the tape. Daniel's voice filled the space, steady but tired. Hearing him again stole my breath. He explained everything he couldn't say out loud while he was alive. Years ago, the farm had been used for something that went beyond farming, something meant to help the town survive during a hard economic stretch. But greed crept in. Corners were cut. Records were altered. When a serious incident occurred, the people involved panicked. Someone had to take responsibility, and Daniel, young and loyal to a fault, agreed to shoulder the blame to protect others. He named names. He spoke calmly, clearly, laying out the truth piece by piece. He admitted his mistake wasn't the incident itself, but his silence afterward. He believed time would bury it. Instead, it poisoned everything: his family, his marriage, his peace. He said he kept the evidence because he knew one day the truth would matter more than his reputation. As the tape ended, footsteps approached the barn. This time, I didn't jump. I stood, box in hand, heart pounding but steady. Samuel stepped inside, followed by two others from town, including the man from the courthouse photos. Their faces told me everything. They knew what I was holding. Samuel spoke first. He said it didn't have to go any further, that the past was ugly, but it was over. I told him it wasn't over, not while lies were still standing in place of truth. I played the tape again, louder this time, letting Daniel's voice fill the barn. One of the men looked away. Another swore under his breath. I told them Daniel had carried this alone for years and that I wouldn't do the same. The documents showed altered ownership records, false transfers, and proof that the farm had been intentionally abandoned to bury accountability. Everything they feared was right there in my hands. The tension snapped when one of them admitted it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a tired confession that matched Daniel's words. He said they never thought Daniel would keep evidence. They never thought his wife would come looking. Within days, the truth spread. Investigations followed. Some people stepped forward willingly. Others didn't have a choice. The town's silence cracked, and with it came relief and resentment in equal measure. Daniel's name was finally cleared, his role understood for what it was. A shield, not a crime. The farm changed after that. Not physically, not right away, but emotionally. The land felt lighter. The house stopped feeling like it was holding its breath. People stopped driving by slowly. The watching eyes disappeared.
I thought that was the end.
I really did. Weeks later, as I prepared to leave Texas for good, I received one final letter. It had been filed with the documents, overlooked until now. Daniel had written it years ago, but addressed it to me. In it, he thanked me for being braver than he ever was. Then came the twist I never saw coming. He revealed that the farm wasn't just a burden or a hiding place. It was a test. The final ownership clause, buried deep in the records, ensured that once the truth came out, the land would legally belong to the person who exposed it. Not sold. Not seized.
Passed on. To me.
The broken-down Texas farm nobody wanted was now mine in every sense of the word. And for the first time, standing in the open fields under that wide sky, I understood why Daniel trusted me with it. The farm wasn't unwanted. It was waiting for someone willing to face the truth. After everything came out, the town slowly began to change. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but it was real. People who once avoided my eyes now nodded when they passed me. Some stopped to talk, offering quiet apologies or simply saying they were glad the truth was finally known. A few never said anything at all, and I learned to accept that too. Not every ending comes with closure from everyone involved. Daniel's name was no longer spoken in whispers. At the diner, I heard someone refer to him as that man who did the right thing, even when it cost him. Hearing that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't fully explain. For years, I had loved a man who carried a burden I never saw. Now, finally, the weight he carried was understood by others, not just me. I spent more time on the farm than I originally planned. What started as a reluctant visit became something deeper. Each morning, I walked the land, feeling its quiet strength. The broken fences were still there. The barns still leaned. But it no longer felt abandoned. It felt honest. Like a place that had survived being misunderstood. I found answers to smaller questions too. Samuel came by one afternoon, his posture less guarded than before. He told me he stayed quiet all those years because he was afraid. Afraid of losing what little stability he had. Afraid of being blamed. He admitted Daniel had protected more people than anyone knew, including him. Saying that out loud seemed to free him in a way I didn't expect. Ruth stopped by with a pie one evening, saying it was time the farm had a proper welcome back into the world. She told me she'd always known the truth would surface someday. She just didn't think she'd live to see it. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, talking about how places carry memories just like people do, and how healing takes time for both. As for the farm itself, I didn't rush to fix everything. I repaired what was necessary and left the rest as it was. The peeling paint and creaking floors felt like part of its story. I didn't want to erase the past. I wanted to build on it. I listened to Daniel's tape one last time before packing it away. This time it didn't hurt as much. His voice felt calm, almost relieved. I realized then that he hadn't just left me land. He left me the truth, and with it, the chance to let him rest. The unexpected twist wasn't the farm becoming mine. It was what the farm gave back to me. It gave me clarity. It gave me understanding. It gave me a deeper version of love, one that existed beyond silence and regret. Eventually, I made the decision to stay part-time. I kept my old life, but I made room for this one too. The broken-down Texas farm that nobody wanted became a place I returned to when I needed grounding. When life felt loud, this land reminded me that truth doesn't need noise to be powerful. On my last night before heading back home after a long stay, I stood in the barn doorway and looked out across the fields. The air was still, the sky wide and endless. I thought about how close I came to walking away, how easy it would have been to sell the land, without ever knowing what was hidden inside. Some inheritances come with money. Some come with responsibility. Mine came with a story that needed to be told. If there's one thing this farm taught me, it's that the places we avoid often hold the answers we need the most. And sometimes, what nobody wants is exactly what we're meant to find. I locked the barn, placed the key in my pocket, and walked back toward the house, feeling lighter with every step. The farm wasn't broken anymore. And in a quiet, unexpected way, neither was I.